Welcome to 125 years of British diplomacy in Kuwait. Now, Kuwait and Britain have shared a very warm and close relationship based on mutual understanding, trust, and friendship. And it's a relationship that goes well before the discovery of oil. And we're going to talk about that today in this very special episode. Now, today is a special occasion. It is the International Women's Day, and in this episode, we celebrate the spirit of a remarkable British woman. Dame Violet Dixon arrived in Kuwait in 1929. She was the first British woman to have lived in the British residence. And what a remarkable life of service she led. In this special episode titled From the First Lady to the First British Woman Diplomat, celebrating 90 years of British women's diplomacy in Kuwait, we pay tribute to her and the other guests, Ambassador Belinda Lewis, Sheikha, Halah Sabah, and Alison Shan MBE. From the first British woman in the British residence to the first British woman diplomat in the Arabian Gulf, it is a 90-year-old journey of British diplomacy filled with several milestones. Now, the Anglo-Kuwaiti Agreement of 1899 was just one of the milestones. Our guests today are three exceptional women, and I will give you more details about them as we bring them in. But what connects these three women is that they are strong women achievers, trailblazers, and I'm so honored to speak to them about someone that I've read about, someone that I've written about, and deeply admired for a very long time, Dame Violet Dixon. Alison, welcome to 125 years of British diplomacy in Kuwait. I'm so glad to have you on the show. It's a great honor, it's a privilege, and I wanted to request you to give us a brief overview of Anglo-Kuwaiti relationship until 1929. I think that's the year that Dame Violet Dixon came to Kuwait. She did, right?
Yes.
So it would be really good if you could give us a short overview of British-Kuwait relationship till that time.
Well, thank you, Shatali. It's a pleasure. And Britain has actually been in the region for 435 years. Elizabeth I signed a treaty with the Sultan Murad, who's also called Amurath, and that's mentioned in Shakespeare's Henry IV, Part 2, and also in Gertrude Bell's book Amurath to Amurath about the Ottoman Empire. They signed a treaty, and therefore 10 years later, we had the introduction to Aleppo of the company that was the Levant Company of Turkey merchants. And then in 1635, we had the East India Company opening in Basra. Now, they created a factory, and in 1775 to 1778, they were directed into Kuwait, and that was the first time that we have recorded relationships between Britain and Kuwait. And that was because of a Persian invasion into Basra and also a plague. And during that time in 1775, much trade was done because Kuwait has the best deep water port in the Gulf. It was famous all the way around the world, and ships could come quite close to the land. Then what happened was that the Ottoman Empire was trying to encroach on the Gulf regions, assuming that that also was under their hegemony. And the Gulf regions and the sheikhs joined with Britain to have a perpetual maritime treaty, which in 1858 the aim was to stop slavery and also to free from piracy all the trade routes that could clear all the seas. Because the Gulf states, the Gulf countries decided upon this, they also decided it might be a good idea to form a protectorate with Britain. They had a choice of France and Russia and various other countries, but they decided to form it with Britain because that would protect them from the Ottomans and also desert invaders and also other European countries such as Russia, who was coming down and encroaching on their countries. Now, this was a non-interference policy, and therefore it was invited in 1897 by Sheikh Mubarak al-Sabah, who wanted to have sovereignty for Kuwait against the Ottomans. It was accepted by Britain in 1899, and the treaty was signed on the 23rd of January. This was a secret arrangement because Britain still had relationships with the Ottoman Empire. But in 1913, what we call the Blue Line, the Anglo-Ottoman Treaty, acknowledged the fact that Kuwait could be considered as its own sovereignty. However, this was not ratified because of World War I. In 1904, Kuwait invited Britain to open a residency within Kuwait, and they took a house, rented a house from a merchant called Al-Asfal. So the Al-Asfal family have claim to this house, and it was bought by Sheikh Abdullah for Dame Violet Dickson after the death of Colonel Dickson in 1959, because of all the things that she had done for Kuwait, with the request that she stayed in Kuwait.
Okay.
So
That's fascinating.
yes,
Alison, so it's the Dixon house we're talking about. The Al Asfour owned the
yes,
Dixon
it did.
house, right?
And I met
this
a
is-
gentleman, one of the
Oh.
Al-Asfals, who told me about this information
Yes.
in the airport.
Oh, wow. And this is, I mean, fascinating. I mean, there's so much I did not know. Thank you for that. And now I'm going to go back and read about it even more because I'm interested in history and especially anything that has to do with Kuwait. Now, personally, since I've known you, which has been a really long time, more than almost 15 to 16 years, I've never seen you afraid to learn. And that's one quality that I believe you have with, very common with Dame Violet Dixon, because she was unafraid to learn during her 6 decades here in Kuwait. Now, to what do you ascribe this passion for learning in yourself, and how did Dame Violet navigate her journey of learning?
Well, I would say that Dame Violet was a Victorian woman.
Okay.
They're a certain breed of English
Yes.
woman.
Yes.
And they were born in the late 19th century and lived in the 20th century. They're resilient, resourceful, and they really faced danger head on. They took on 2 world wars, and they had a sense of humour that enabled them to get through every single situation. They would grab their family, who was the most important thing to them, and they would move with their family. It was because they took every single moment and they took every challenge as it came. Now, Dame Violet took on these challenges not only in Kuwait, but as a young bride, or before she was a young bride, she travelled over from Switzerland to England at the beginning of World War I, and she said
Okay.
it was rather difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Became a banker, travelled to Marseille, met her husband, and he asked her to marry him in a telegram after meeting her for a couple of hours. And she immediately said yes. She made her way to Bombay on a ship with soldiers, and then they were married immediately.
Alison, Dame Violet, as you mentioned, met Colonel Dixon in south of France, and she was working in a bank. And I don't think at the end of the 19th century and beginning of the 20th century, it was not very common for those women in those days to go leave their country and to go to another country and work, but she did it. So the seeds of independence and self-reliance they were in her. She wasn't Violet Dixon because she married Colonel Harry Dixon.
That's right.
She was Violet Dixon in her own right. She was a leader in her own right, and probably, given a chance, would have done as good a job as a husband. Do you agree?
Not at the time.
Okay.
I would say possibly now.
Okay.
But of course, what Britain does is they fit the ambassador to the country of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And it is wonderful that Ambassador Lewis is here now.
Yeah.
It is a very difficult job that we understand. But at that time, every single political officer, political agent was in the army because it was turbulent. It was after 1920, the Ottomans were trying to get back in because there was freedom in a way, because people were very concerned about which way it was going to go after the mandate. Then you had uprisings all the time. So the Colonel Dixon could manage this. He'd already been in World War I into Iraq, in Nasiriyah, for the working with the great Mutafik tribe, and he had been responsible for crop growing, and he was responsible for floods and famine and tribal disputes, etc. So
He was better placed, you
Well,
mean?
well,
The right
totally.
person at the right time.
also, until now, recently, it's wonderful that Kuwait has also sent their first ambassador, female ambassador, to America. It was really an androcentric world, a patriarchal
That's
world.
right. That's right. Yes.
Therefore, for a woman to go in and discuss matters of such importance, where they were not so much connected with Britain, they had to do it
That's
as
right.
a man on the spot. Gertrude was an exception, but she was supported tremendously. Then I would say no. She
would
couldn't
have been
at
tough.
that time have
Okay.
taken on the tremendous job that he did.
Okay.
He had to go out to the desert when Faisal al-Darwish,
Yeah.
who of course is part of the Battle of Jarrah, he came back in 1929 and he was coming to the war. And therefore, it was Colonel Dickson who went out and asked him for his sword and convinced him with his thousands of followers not to invade Kuwait once again.
That would have been very difficult for anybody else to do.
Oh, he wouldn't have listened to
They wouldn't have listened to that, actually.
No.
You're right. So now I've read that Dame Violet was variously called by the locals. She was called Saud, Kuwait, and very, very interestingly, Hajjiyah. Now, Hajjiyah is a title given to people who've done the Hajj. Now, how did Dame Violet get that name, and how significant was it for a British woman to be called Kuwait?
Well, Hajjiyah, I also have understood that she was called Hajjiyah, and I asked many of Kuwaiti scholars, was that possible because she hadn't been to the Hajj? And he said, no, not officially. She couldn't officially be called that. But as she aged and became a senior member of the country, then that was a mark of respect for a senior woman. So
I see.
Hajjiyah.
So, okay.
So that's the way that they called her
That's the way. Okay.
Saud was because she had given
son.
birth to her first son
Yeah.
in Warrington Saud. I remember when I was called Bradley for the first time, and I was so proud.
Yeah.
My daughter wasn't, because she was the firstborn. She thought that wasn't quite
Yes,
right.
I know. Yes.
But that's an honorific title in Kuwait. And
Kuwait, what about Kuwait, mother of Kuwait? I mean, that's
it
so
was an interesting
remarkable,
point.
right?
That was by Sheikh, His Highness
Okay.
Sheikh Abdullah,
Okay.
who after the death of Colonel Dickson gave her the keys of the house and said, please accept it and please stay here, because she was thinking about, should she go home? She was devastated after her husband's death for a year. She kept inside. Or should she stay because her husband was buried here? And he said, you are mother to so many. The reason for that is that she was determined that in famine, because of course we had the world depression in Kuwait, all over the world.
That's right.
And between wars, you had the Japanese pearl industry swamping the market.
Yeah, which was destroying the pearl diving.
Aeroplanes were coming in, so the sea trade was dropping, and people were devastated. Although inside the wall, they were fine. Outside the wall, there were great famine. And during the wartime, she marched up to a lot of people and said, you must bring down the dates from Basra. People need that to survive there. Animals need that to survive. She demanded coats to be brought in from Europe. And only when Colonel Dickson was again the political officer, now in the embassy in 1941, just for a few months, it's an interim period between political officers, that she managed to get passage from Persia of 100 millstones. So they could grind barley and make bread. And she paid for it out of her own money. That's why she was called Kuwait. She enveloped as much as one can do from another country.
Yeah.
She gave her heart and her, not quite her life, but she gave her heart here, including the fact that in the World War II, she sent her children to Britain.
But she didn't
go
go
to school.
herself.
But she determined to stay so people wouldn't be frightened. She was frightened for her children. They were in London. And she missed them desperately throughout the war. And she writes about it. But she put Kuwait first.
Yeah, but she didn't leave Kuwait, right? I mean, that tells so much about
her. It tells so much about the fact that her heart was given.
That's right.
She is an inspiration to all of us. And sadly, until now, her story, and as so many other women, Arabists around in the region, who have so many stories to tell, they've been buried, they've been hidden as unimportant, but they are the most important because they tell history, they tell of events, they tell of rebellions, they tell of anti-British feeling, they tell of what happens when Germany decided to inspire the youth to change the country, etc., for World War II. It's all in her book.
Yeah, it's only her book. Very, very interesting. Now, how big was the role of both the Dicksons in strengthening Anglo-Kuwaiti ties?
I think not only in the time, but now.
Even now.
Now, because we're bringing back the history as that. They created cultural bridges, but you cannot create a cultural bridge with one person. So because Violet Dixon would go out with the children, treasure hunt on the beach, sit on the wall and talk to the fishermen, she'd accept her friends in the desert and stay in the desert for 3 months of the year. Her first time that she was left there by Colonel Dickson, she said she almost divorced him because of the fact he just left her there with the children not knowing what to do. Her friends from the desert taught her so much about botany, which she, of course, became quite famous for in that way, sending things to Kew Gardens. And she always invited her friends to the embassy. She had a special room for ladies who did not want to mingle. And she always would talk about Kuwait when she was abroad. So when the Queen Mother asked her what she did in Kuwait, when she was quite old, she stated, I live there. How else could you describe
I live there.
your heart? It's my home as such.
Thank you for speaking to us, Alison. That was very, very enlightening.
Thank you so much. It's been wonderful. Thank you.
I'm so very honored to welcome Ambassador Belinda Lewis to this episode of 125 Years of British Diplomacy in Kuwait. Well, Ambassador Belinda Lewis chose to serve in some of the most dangerous places in the world, including Helmand in Afghanistan and Iraq. And in Afghanistan, as the last head of the mission of the Helmand reconstruction team, she oversaw the closure of the operation and handed over the project to the United Nations. Now, in Helmand, again, I found that very interesting. She led a very frugal life in a sea shipping container, which was modified into living quarters with very few belongings. She arrived in Kuwait during the lockdown with a 10-month-old baby and a 3-year-old child. In 1929, Dame Violet Dickson to London and Kuwait with her young children. Now, it'll be very interesting to speak to the ambassador about her reflections on Dame Violet and her own life in foreign service. Welcome, Ambassador.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for the space, this beautiful building. You were telling me that it started to be constructed around which year was that?
In 1931, the building work started, and the house was all finished in 1934, ready for Colonel Dickson and Violet Dixon to move in as the first residents here. I'm very, very lucky to call this home.
Yes, and I don't think they were here for a very long time, were they?
No, I think it was maybe about 18 months or so before Colonel Dickson retired and then started to work for the Kuwait Oil Company.
Okay, so it makes it more poignant that we are here today talking about her in this balcony where she must have been sitting here and overlooking, watching the road, the Arabian Gulf Road, which I'm sure was very different sight in those days, right?
I don't think it was even built, so she would have had a wonderful view of the sea. And there is something quite timeless about this house where lots of the views are the same. The sound of the birds would have been the same. And to think that it was 90 years ago to this day when she moved in 1934. And now here we are in 2024. To think that a remarkable legend like Violet Dixon was enjoying the same space and making her life and raising her children here. It's very interesting to
Very, very interesting, yes. Now, Violet Dixon was not in foreign service, in the sense it was her husband who was in foreign service. But she didn't have an official title. But at the same time, and I asked this question to Alison Sean Price, how that she had the makings of a diplomat herself.
what made you join the Foreign Service, and what were your early lives in service, in Foreign Service as a diplomat?
So I didn't come straight into diplomacy.
Okay.
After I left university, I worked for a bank for a few years. And then I joined the Home Civil Service, so I spent quite a few years with the Ministry of Justice. I also worked for the Home Office. I worked for the Department for Culture, Media and Sport. So I moved around a little bit, but based in London for about 10 years before I went to Afghanistan, which was my first diplomatic assignment. I think most people who join the diplomatic service do it because they have a sense of adventure. And I think this was the same for Violet as well. She'd spent quite a lot of time overseas before she arrived in Kuwait. And she was a brilliant linguist. She had a very lively mind. She was a very intelligent lady.
She was.
And had lots of different interests. And I think one of the real privileges, as well as serving one's country as a diplomat, is you get to go in and out of other cultures, different countries, different landscapes. And it really is fascinating. I thought this the first time I lived overseas, when I was in Milan in Italy, when I was still a very young banker. I remember going to the post office one morning to buy a stamp. And I came away thinking, even going out to buy a stamp is so much more interesting if you're doing it overseas.
That's
and
right.
it's just kind of boring routine back in your own country. And I think it's that sense of wanting to explore other things, different ways of doing things. I think that's what generally attracts people to a life in the Foreign Service. My early years as a diplomat were difficult, quite bruising.
I can imagine.
I came in partway through my career, so I was working with people, leading people who had spent 10, 15, 20 years as a diplomat, and then I came in completely green with lots of knowledge about other working environments and different ways of doing things, but I had to learn very, very fast. And I think this is also one of the curious anomalies about the diplomatic service, where in some ways, certainly as an ambassador, you have a certain amount of freedom to set priorities, to decide what you will and won't do, how you use your resources. But there are also very strict rules, and you have to work within a very tightly defined framework. So you have sort of freedom on one hand, but then you're kind of restricted about how you do things and exactly what kind of freedoms you have on the other side. So that sense of where are the rules and which ones do you really need to stick to, that was something that I had to do some fast learning on.
And I'm sure that Dame Violet Dixon also had her own set of rules to navigate in those days, right?
I'm sure she did. I mean, her life was just so fascinating. And you mentioned that she was not the one with the formal position in society. It was her husband who had the official appointment. And yet she managed, as a foreigner, to turn up somewhere completely different and to establish herself, to be accepted in society. She was someone that people wanted to call on, wanted to talk to, and she was keen to learn from other people and to discuss things. And I think to be able to have that kind of presence, that sort of force of personality, to be of interest to people, to be accepted in a very different world to the one that she grew up in, I think she just must have had a very strong character. And I think probably to have been good fun, to have been interesting to sit and have a cup of tea with. But to establish herself in the way that she did, when she wasn't the one with any kind of formal entry into society. Yeah. I'm not sure how many other women of her time were able to do that.
Absolutely, yeah. So not many, and I think this is coming up again and again as we are talking to different women, that not many women could have done what Dame Violet did. Undoubtedly, she was a leader, a woman ahead of her times, as we mentioned. And women around the world, despite the passage of 90 years, continue to face challenges in leadership positions, irrespective of where they are. What factors do you think impacts a woman's ability to lead?
I think this is it's a fascinating question. In some ways, it's a one that, in all honesty, I sometimes try not to think about too much, because I think you should have an effective person who is in a leadership position. If they're a man or if they're a woman, it shouldn't matter. And yet, I think it does still to some people, not to everybody. And I think the position that I have, it's much easier for me to be a female ambassador now than it would have been a number of decades ago. I think there's something about people's preconceptions about leaders, about what you need to be a good leader, to be strong, to have sound judgment, to be brave. Lots of those sorts of attributes for a long time have been associated probably more with men than with women. But there's no real reason for that apart from men have been in leadership positions. So they've been able to display their bravery, their good judgment, their sense of courage. And women have had fewer opportunities today to be able to do that. And I think the more women you have in leadership positions, the more I hope people will realize that actually one's gender isn't that important. It's about how well prepared you are, how seriously you're taking the job, how hard you're working, do you have the right skills, the right experience to be able to fulfill your duties properly. I also think having a sense of humor really helps in terms of leadership, but to use humor and to bring out some of your own personality, you also need to feel quite settled and quite confident in your leadership. And sometimes that is harder for women because I think they are second guessed, simply because there haven't been as many female leaders. But I think in decades to come, hopefully in 90 years' time, we won't need to have these sorts of conversations.
Absolutely.
Because people will just be used to leaders appointed on merit, and we all just get on with the job.
And I hope it happens sooner than that. We don't have to wait 90
absolutely.
years. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. Now, despite the odds, Dame Violet Dixon never gave up. So how do you encourage women not to give up?
So I think a lot of my advice when I'm talking to either younger people or people who are earlier in their career in the diplomatic service, or just people that I come across and have interesting conversations with, whether it's a man or a woman, often my advice is the same. But I think sometimes as women, we don't always help ourselves. Sometimes we put too much pressure on ourselves. And I think a lot of this is to do with pressures that we sense in wider society. What I do often say to people is, don't be in too much of a hurry. And this would be advice that I would give to men and to women. There's sometimes this sense that if you go for promotion or you go for a particular job and you don't get it, where people then think, oh dear, well, I can't do it. That's it. Maybe I need to think differently about a different career path. But actually, if you don't happen to get that job one year, you might get it when it's advertised, maybe in 2 or 3 years' time. If you don't get promotion at one point, just apply for something else and wait until you have another promotion board. Just because it doesn't happen immediately or doesn't happen the first time you try for something, you shouldn't give up.
Yeah.
You might just not be in the right place at the right time, but who's to say in 6 months' time it won't be different. And I think there's also that sense of feeling that you have to be getting everything right, that it all has to be perfect, otherwise somehow you're failing. And I do find myself probably saying this more to women than to men. Don't let the best be the enemy of the good. You don't have to be perfect, because do you know what? If that is your aim, you're going to fail. No one's perfect. No leader gets it right all the time. You can't keep everybody happy. So do the best that you can. And as long as you're well prepared, you're diligent, you're trying your best, and you're doing a good job, then that's usually enough. Because of course you don't have to do everything yourself. You should have a team around you.
That's right.
I also think it's easier for women to stay focused on their career and to move ahead with their job if they have a supportive family around them.
Oh, 100%.
This is something that often is taken for granted, where you have a successful man who has forged ahead in his career. Behind him or alongside him, you have this whole support structure of possibly a spouse or wider family or a household team who are there to take care of everything else. And women need that too. And I think often there's this sense that we're supposed to be doing everything.
That's right.
I couldn't do this job without my husband.
Absolutely.
He is absolutely my rock, and I rely on him a heck of a lot. And I don't feel bad doing that. We're here as a partnership, like Harold and Violet were.
That's right.
She needed him and he needed her just as much.
Yeah. Thank you for speaking to us, Ambassador. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you.
Our next guest is Sheikha Halah Badr Al Muhammad Al Sabah. Her father, His Excellency Badr Al Sabah, is the older brother of His Excellency Sheikh Nasser Mohammed, the Prime Minister of Kuwait. Now, her father passed away in 1995, and he was the first Kuwaiti ambassador to the UAE and the first Kuwaiti ambassador from the ruling family to Saudi Arabia. Now, Sheikha Halah's grandfather, His Excellency Sheikh Mohammed Al Sabah, was the first defense minister in Kuwait's history. Interestingly, her father and her grandfather are the first Kuwaitis from Kuwait's ruling family to have studied in the United Kingdom, Paris and Beirut. Now, Sheikha Halah worked in the Emiri Diwan. She's also very, very closely involved in philanthropy. She she loves antiquities, she loves history and heritage, and she's invested in strengthening Kuwait's ties with the United Kingdom. Now, she established a school in Jeddah in 1999, which she managed for some time, and her personal association with Dame Violet Dickson makes it even more poignant. The fact that we have her on the show and she's going to share her memories with us, that is something that's very special. Welcome to 125 years of British diplomacy in Kuwait, Sheikha Halah. I am so honored to have you here on the show with us. I wanted to ask you, your presence on the show is very special. That's because of your personal association with Dame Violet Dickson. Not many people are there in Kuwait who can say that they knew her or they were close to her. You are one of those very rare people. So I'd like to ask you, what are your strongest memories of Dame Violet?
Thank you very much. Really, you are bringing me to the golden time of my life.
Okay.
I love her so much because I'm the eldest granddaughter to my grandfather. So I be with him all the time wherever he go.
Okay.
One of the places is Mrs. Dickson house. And she loves me so much. And she know that my grandfather loves me so much. She taught me a lot of things. And I will never forget her.
What kind of things did she teach you?
She taught me first the numbers, 1, 2, 3,
Okay.
and then the days and the month. And she taught me how to plant the seeds. And, when we be naughty, sometimes she sit and she put paper and then she said, draw for me that pigeon, draw for me this plant. And amazing that she was showing me the flowers of Kuwait. Amazing how she's
How she remembered,
yes,
right?
even the one which
Yeah.
in desert. And I don't know if you know that or not, that she's not only speak Arabic, she also can write with,
She wrote
with
Arabic.
yes, with
Okay.
Mr. Dickson.
Okay.
I didn't meet him, of course. My father and my grandfather, they met him, I think. But she was amazing when she draw in and she write in Arabic. Of course, with little bit, it's not.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah.
Did she have a good sense of humor?
Oh yeah. A lot, a lot.
She was in a good mood all the time.
All the time. For that's why everybody loves her. And she know all the houses in Kuwait, even the women's.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
And when she come to our diwaniyah, to my grandfather, she must visit my grandmother.
Okay.
And all the ladies, they love her. Nobody, the women, nobody get jealous of her. No, they are waiting for her.
I see.
Yeah.
That's interesting, right? I mean, to have a foreigner or an expatriate and a Westerner, and you take her within your folds, you embrace her and make her your own.
We never
You never treated her.
we never think about her that she's a foreigner. Her name is Saud. She's
Kuwait
yeah.
also. This is what I asked my friend Alison. I said, why was she called Kuwait? I mean, it's such a huge honor to be given to, someone who, well, technically doesn't belong here.
Yeah.
But then it's because of her love for this place,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Yes.
And she know everybody. She know the children. And when she hears somebody get born with a new child, she go to visit. And she know all the diwaniyas. Also, the all diwaniyas here
On the Arabian Gulf Road?
Arabian Gulf
Yeah.
Road. And she must visit my grandfather diwaniyah.
Okay.
Must.
She had to
And she
visit.
have a day every 2 weeks to have lunch in our house. After my grandfather passed away, my father and my uncle, they didn't stop the relation with her. She have every 2 weeks, one day that
She would come for lunch.
Yeah.
What kind of food does she enjoy?
The Kuwaiti food. She like, we call it mطبق زبيدي. She
Okay.
like the zbedi,
likes
and she like
zbedi.
my mother to do it for her.
Okay.
Yeah.
She liked her cooking.
Yes.
Okay.
And when we receive her, we don't open the house. She say, I'm a part of the same daily room, everything.
Okay. Today we are seated in this very, very beautiful balcony, which is overlooking the Arabian Gulf Road, and we can hear the sound of cars swishing by, and we can hear the birds chirping, but I think it adds to the ambience, doesn't it? It's such a symbol. This building today is now a symbol of Anglo-Kuwaiti friendship, and it is but appropriate that we should sit here and we should look at the same scene. It's different now, but when Violet Dixon sat here, maybe she sat here, perhaps 90 years back, and when she looked ahead, she saw not what we are seeing now. I'm sure she saw the Arabian Gulf, the sea in front of her, right?
Yeah.
She loved the sea, I've heard.
A lot.
Yeah.
Before, we don't have the street. All the water till not exactly near the gate, but there is like a sand. We can go and
play there.
Play there.
Yeah.
I have a good memories here in the embassy with her.
Embassy?
Yeah, and with the ambassador and my grandfather here.
In the garden.
In the garden, yeah.
Okay.
She's a respectable woman.
She was.
Everybody loves her.
And even after so many years, Kuwaitis still remember her with so much of fondness. Right?
Always.
Yeah.
Always. Always.
She's become a part of history, of Kuwait's history.
She's a part of our history.
That's right.
A part of our history. Everybody have a memory with her, especially the older people.
The older people.
Yeah, because she's a respectable, and wherever she goes, she leave the love in her step.
She leaves that behind. She keeps that's so beautifully said, Sheikha Halah. And so you now, what about, you mentioned that she visited your house for lunch.
Yeah.
And how do you take that, I may say that this warm and close friendship between your family and Dame Violet, that in a way it is a symbolic of the very close and warm relationship that Britain has had with Kuwait? I know that you're very interested in strengthening of Kuwaiti-British relationship.
Yes, we have a very long relation, a very, very long relation. And we are so grateful to Britain when help us in all these days, and especially when Kuwait in 1961 start to Liberation Day, and then
1991.
Yes, 1961 when Kuwait start to
independence.
Independent. And then we asked for help. After 2 days of that, the Iraq the Iraq, they said that we are part of them, and we asked.
I remember that.
Immediately they help us, and still we have that good relation. We are a very good friend with Britain, and Britain is a very good friend to us. We will never forget their stand with us in their liberation also, the same, and we will never forget Mrs. Thatcher. If she's not there, the war won't stop.
Yeah, the war wouldn't have, the war of independence wouldn't have started. Now, have an impact, a lasting impact on you. Did she influence your life in any way?
I love her life.
Okay.
The simplicity. I love it. If you means that to be
her strength, her larger than life character, the way she took all her challenges and she faced all challenges.
As I told you, I was in the golden time.
Yeah.
I've been raised in time that you can see the strong people. She's one of the strongest people which I met. You cannot imagine how she's at home and she's old, but she can manage all this. Especially when I go in the background, I see the horse or the pigeon how she can manage that, how she can walk, and she's alone. She's alone.
Yeah.
How she can do that, and how she can do her visits. And when she go to the Amir in Amiri Diwan there, she's so strong, she's a combination of love, strong,
strength.
yes, and she's lovable with the people.
She's very close to the people.
Yeah.
And so now you yourself have led a very inspiring life with your work with the Amir Diwan and your various philanthropies, and you're founding of the Diplomatic Women's Committee.
Yes.
So Violet Dixon did not enjoy any official position, but despite her many contributions, she's still the wife of Colonel Harold Dickson. How do you remember her as an example of empowered womanhood at a time when women were not empowered? I mean, we're talking about 1960s. She started her journey in Kuwait 1929. I mean, women did not come out of the house and work at that point of time unless they were nurses or, maybe doing some. So how do you see her as a symbol of women's empowerment?
Well, she's a very lovely example. I remember one time we gather as a diplomatic, and they were talking about the woman. I told them I want to talk about Mrs. Dickson.
Okay.
And there is a lot of ambassadors, they don't know who's Mrs. Dickson.
I see.
So I start to talk about her. I tell her, if we take her powerful and her opinion, we can do a lot of things. I think she was encouraging all the women in Kuwait, and she was so happy. We have Sheikha Badriya Saud Sabah. She was the first manager in health ministry, and she always visit her, and they were talking about their memories. And also we have a lot of women, as a teachers. She always encouraged them. I remember there is one school near her, which it used to be my mother school.
Okay.
She always go out and she visit this school.
And she spoke to the girls there.
Yes.
That's wonderful.
I didn't see that, but
must
they
have been
told
doing
me,
that,
a
yes,
lot
that-
of women of my family, they told me that Mrs. Dickson always visit us, always tell, no, you have to study, to build your country, to serve in your country.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sheikha Halah, for sharing these wonderful memories of Dame Violet Dixon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Welcome, ladies, to 125 years of British diplomacy in Kuwait. It's so good of you to come in and talk to us all together now. So now I want to ask Alison, as well as Ambassador Lewis, this question, that how different are the choices available to women in Britain now as compared to when Dame Violet began her journey? It's a totally different landscape now, right?
It certainly is. I think when we think about the choices and opportunities open to women now, to be able to continue their education, to be able to fulfill their career aspirations, I feel so fortunate that we have so many more options than we had, say, 90 years ago when Violet Dixon was living in this house. I think there are still different perceptions about women who go on to become leaders or notable in their field. But I think a lot of it, particularly what I see in the Foreign Office, we need more women to apply for these jobs. We need women to decide, I want to continue my education. I want to do a PhD. I want to reach the very top of the tree. And I think there needs to be that constant encouragement to everybody, whether you're a man or a woman, to push yourself and go as far as you want to, if that's what you want to do. Not everybody wants to do that. People have different dreams and ambitions. But when I think about what Violet Dixon could have chosen to do in terms of her occupation and career choices, I feel so fortunate that I really feel it's been up to me. I could choose what I wanted, work hard, and then it's up to me to succeed or fail.
Yeah, so the opportunities are there. It's
Yes.
the willpower, and I suppose a little bit of mentoring as well.
I think
which is-
mentoring is very helpful. Yes.
Yeah, something that wasn't there perhaps during Violet Dixon's time, right,
It's a very
Alison?
different life.
Yeah.
So women were educated in a different way. If they had money, then and they had the ability, then their parents would bring in Cambridge and Oxford tutors. We have that with Ada Lovelace, who was Lady Anne Blunt's mother, and also her mother, who married Lord Byron. She was known as the Princess of Parallelograms. So they had the ability, but only if they could pay.
And now coming to you, Sheikha Halah, I do want to ask you this, that as a strong, empowered Kuwaiti woman yourself, how far do you think have Kuwaiti women come since the struggle for the right to vote started? I think that began pretty early. And despite, which is very ironic, and I always say this, that even without the right to struggle, even before the discovery of oil, I have found Kuwaiti women very, very strong. The fact that Kuwait was left empty of able-bodied men when men went out to the sea for pearl diving and trading and fishing, and there were times when there were hardly, apart from older men, there were hardly and children, there were men in Kuwait left to look after the family, and it's the women who stepped in. It's the women who did the accounts, it's the women who looked after the, kept the home fires burning, and that's very strange that, women were so traditionally so powerful. And then came the right to vote. And now there has been so many, there have been decades after that. How do you see this evolution?
Well, the woman, the Kuwaiti woman, since long time, very, very strong. As you said, how they deal when their men go to the sea. And we fight for our rights in a big battle. His Highness, the late Emir Sheikh Jaber, Al-Ahmed Al-Jaber Al-Sabah, Emir of Kuwait, in 1985, he applied the law, but the parliament keep rejecting till 2005 with late Sheikh Sabah Al-Ahmed, and it was a great day in the 16th of May.
Yes,
it was a great day. Till now, the ladies start to go for another way, not like an engineer or a doctor, or they start to dig for a new knowledge, for a new study. They try to build their country in a new way. We don't want to just stop in the same step. No, we are digging to be more and more powerful. And as you know, we have a lot of parliament women, ambassador. No, we want more than that.
Yeah, and in different professions, not usually the typical professions in which women, are seen, but in different professions. And you see that happening in Kuwait now. You have women in aviation. And I'm sure that as an ambassador, you'll come across, examples of very strong, empowered women in Kuwait, in literature, in arts, in the cultures, and science, research, and technology.
I'm so proud of them. I'm so proud of them. We don't stop in the same step. We're digging for a new things, a new knowledge to. I think these women encourage other also women. They are going for far for that one.
And I think, as you said when I was talking to you, that Dame Violet went into schools and spoke to children, spoke to schoolgirls, and told them that come out and pursue your dreams, never give up on your dreams. I think today that we are talking about this, it is it's a testimony. It's like a tribute to her spirit, that we are paying.
Everybody think that. The Kuwaiti woman just for luxury things. No, we have, we have, to dig, and how I'll say, we are going so far. And thank God that we have a government also encourage us to do that. And also they are sending a lot of girls to study outside in a new positions and the new studies.
It will be interesting to see 20 years later or 25 years later the progress that women from this country will be making, right?
Absolutely. And if I may, just thinking about what happens in 20 years' time, when I think about a reunion that I was at, I studied at Girton College, Cambridge, and I was at a reunion maybe about 20 years ago, and I met some ladies who were then in their 80s, and they were saying to me and some of my friends, girls, you are so lucky. You're so lucky because the world is your oyster. You can do anything you want. And when we finished our studies, we could become a secretary or we could stay in academia. But you have so many choices. You're so fortunate. And that's always stayed with me. And I don't want to feel lucky that I can choose my career. I don't want it to be unusual that I can choose my career. But in comparison to those ladies, I am much more fortunate than them. And I think those stories, those conversations that you have with people who had a different experience and had much more limited choices, it is very inspiring and rousing to make one think, I need to make the most of it. You know, I should be able to do whatever I want, and that might be to go far in public life. It might not be, but to exercise your own freedom of choice, I think, is an enormously powerful thing. Something that women 90 years ago in any society, I think, just didn't have in the way that we do now.
Yeah, absolutely. In any society, I agree with that.
Yeah.
I mean, there were different parts in my country, as I know. The progress has happened more after 1950s and 60s, you know, as far as women's rights and education of women is concerned. You were saying something, Alison.
I think it's wonderful that we can be mothers as well as having careers.
Yeah.
And it is a balance as such. I think Kuwait's a wonderful place for that. I brought up children here, and you're bringing up your children, and you're bringing up your children as well. And there is this wonderful multicultural system where certainly in my career, I've changed 3 times within different paths and been supported by the country as such. I don't really think that might happen so much in Britain, but there's a wonderful female or women's support
Sisterhood.
Kuwait. When I arrived in 1984, I found that. I was so impressed by the Kuwaiti ladies. They would go shopping and look incredibly smart. And I wrote home to my mother, and I have the letters she's kept in the hope chest as such. And I still read them because, of course, there was no internet in those days. And this documents my inspiration that I received from the Kuwaiti ladies, and I will always be grateful for that.
That was excellent. Actually, Alison, yes. I mean, when I was talking about my memories of when I came to Kuwait, which is 20 years back, which is, you know, hardly the time compared to your 40 years. But I have seen the progress that women have been making here in different fields and different areas. And yes, you're right, talking about the sisterhood, the support that we have here, which is so special. And it's the culture of the country, I suppose, you know.
Yes. Yeah.
Which makes it easier for us, you know, to be mothers and to also work at the same time. Thank you so much, Ambassador Belinda Lewis, Sheikha Halah Sabah, and Alison Shan Price for speaking to us here on 125 years of British diplomacy in Kuwait. It was a pleasure and it's been an honor.
Thank you very much.